Next, from Chicago, we talked to Paul Timm, president of RETA Security, about his book, School Security: How to Build and Strengthen a School Safety Program. This runs about 20 minutes.
Paul Timm, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you for having me.
You wrote a book called School Security: How to Build and Strengthen a School Safety Program. Before we get into what the book is about, let's let people know a little bit about yourself and what expertise do you bring to this subject.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm a security consultant since the late 90s and actually second generation. I grew up at Argonne National Labs where there was a high risk, and what we did is we transferred a whole lot of the strategies that we had put in place to make a campus like that safe into the K through 12 arena, and I've specialized in that ever since the late 90s.
When you wrote this book, obviously, school security, what is the nature of the threats that you imagined when you wrote the book?
Well, the greatest threat is always the insider threat. Whether it's staff that have issues or students, and there's a very large population of students, or a non-custodial parent issue, a visitor, while the latter group would be outsiders. We have a whole lot going on in a school arena where, for example, the Unity Junior High School in Cicero, Illinois has 3,000 7th and 8th graders in one building. So we're concerned primarily about the insider threat.
And how would one respond to that threat to make sure that security is in place?
Well, there first of all has to be the presence of security, whether it's staff or security personnel. We have to have people monitoring activities that are going on, and we have activities that can become volatile. We've got sporting events. It doesn't take much to realize that we have, emotional investment in sporting events. We've got recess, physical education, cafeteria situations where bullying is always present. But today's environment also has social media threats. So it's not confined to just typical spaces like you and I would have been used to. Now it's cyber, it's everywhere.
And when you say social media threat, what would be an example?
Well, let's say that somebody gets a hold of an inappropriate photo of me, and all of a sudden that gets perpetuated on Facebook or whatever that might be. That's a social media. Or somebody says, I'm going to get X person on Facebook or even on Snapchat, a place like that. Those kinds of threats can become viral in a very short amount of time.
And are you concerned about that act in and of itself, or are you concerned about the emotional reaction and it being acted out in a violent way?
I'm concerned about both. Remember, anytime we have problems, there's generally been risk factors or we've been moving down the road toward something actually acting out. I want to intervene as soon as possible. In fact, I'd rather prevent if I could. And so all of those things are concerns to me in the entire continuum.
It's amazing when we think about education and how it's changed that no one thought about all this myriad of issues that schools have to deal with, the educators have to deal with. And so this school safety, I will tell the viewers, is a big topic of conversation, in part because there was, I believe, a committee put together under Governor Quinn that then came out in July, I believe.
Correct.
Are you familiar with that report? Or?
Yes, I mean, I've been reading all of the reports and I'm familiar with the task force and actually the commitment now that the state has made to trying to make the learning environment safer.
And given what you know about what those recommendations are and given your expertise in the area of security, are we heading down the right road as far as making schools safer?
We are, and I just want the arrow pointed in the right direction. There's no such thing as perfect security, but I will tell you this, there are two areas that protect people, which is what I'm most concerned about, that protect people better than any other, and those two areas are communications. We have to be able to get a hold of somebody if we need assistance. We have to be out in a place where we can hear an emergency announcement if one is made. Communications, always important, and then access control. Do we know at any given time who's in our buildings? That's really important. Or conversely, at any given time, who's no longer in our building that's supposed to be. So I always tell people, if you only have $1 to spend and an hour to plan, focus on communications and access control first.
Some of the ideas, and first of all, let's talk about the nature of the threat. So we talked it could be a school shooter, as we've sadly seen in any number of instances. Often, as you've mentioned, that can be someone who's a student. As we saw in Sandy Hook Elementary, it was someone who was not a student, an exterior threat. Following Sandy Hook, one of the suggestions that people bandied about is that they ought to have someone trained at the school who is armed. Have you thought about that as a solution, and what are your thoughts?
Well, not only have I thought about it, but I get asked that question probably first in every conference and seminar I speak at. And what I would say is this: if I could put a school resource officer at every school building in America, I would. And that would be the only person I would ever advocate being armed. I am not for arming the general populace of staff. I just think...
But have one person on staff who at least is, or whoever that person is.
I would want it to be a police officer.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I guess that begs the question, if we can afford with education to have a police officer at every school. Right?
And we cannot. And so what you'll see is at high schools, and especially more in your urban areas, sometimes at the middle school level, almost never at the elementary school level, unless maybe they're sharing somebody who comes by once a week or whatever it might be.
Now, as we sit here attending the Illinois Association of School Boards Conference, there are vendors, and some of the vendors will have telephone apps, right? Everyone knows.
Yes.
And we can have where we punch out, and they do different things. One is that it would go directly to the first responders, so they're alerted. Or one might be, as you say, can you hear the announcement of an emergency? It might be something that could be sent out to all the students and staff at one time. And in conjunction with those efforts, there are discussions about having doors to classrooms that then lock, that can't be open. I mean, where you can safeguard the students. There's probably 100 safety and security things we could mention, but just along those lines, what are some of the really interesting ideas that you think are viable and cost effective?
Yes. Well, let me go with things that I'm really liking the advent of and things that I'm concerned about. First of all, I love mass notifications. So anytime we can take an app and put it on our smartphone and have access to what our emergency procedures are, if nothing else, just for awareness sake, that's really important. If we can then notify beyond that, I've got an incident right now. I mean, yesteryear, what we would do is have to go to the classroom, near the classroom door, and hit a button for an intercom. And I love intercom systems, but if you can have it right on your person at all times, I really like the app. There's no doubt that that's going to be helpful, and we're just beginning to see how important that will be. On the concern side, I really do not like the aftermarket classroom security devices because most of them violate, pardon me, I want to be careful here, I think all of them violate safety and ADA codes. And so if I'm going to buy something that stops the door from latching so that the door can always be locked and I would just have to remove that and then pull the door closed and we'd all be safe. The problem is anyone can come into our room at any time and remove that, and now we can't get into the room. Or if it's a lab, it might be a fire-rated door which must be self-closing and self-latching. Other products require prior knowledge, which is a violation of an NFPA code. Others cannot be deployed by people with special needs, which is a violation of ADA codes. So I like a classroom security lock that allows us to secure the room from the inside instead of having to go outside into the hall and get it from the outside of the door. I think that's tried and true, and then we require everybody to keep their key right there, maybe on a lanyard, so they know where it is.
So, yes for the locking of the doors, but on the inside.
Exactly right.
What about some of these doors it's been a long time since I was in high school, but we would have some of the wooden doors, but we would also have like a glass window in there of some sort. Should we not have any windows any longer?
Well, we have to have windows. That's a State Board of Education rule because it promotes accountability for what's going on in the room. Anyone can pass by from the hallway and see that. But you're right, that glass, which is generally tempered glass, is the weak spot. We've got a great door, we've got good locking mechanisms, the hardware is all great, but the tempered glass with the use of force can be punched through and someone can reach in and get the handle in a moment. And so we like laminated glass, or if we have tempered glass, putting a film over that reinforces it against forced entry.
Now, another part of the security, we're acting here as if there's a shooter or some kind of a threat along those lines. Another aspect of school security is what happens when a tornado comes. Right. And that might even, for a lot of people, especially in Tornado Alley in Illinois as we are, you know, these days a lot of times kids are being pushed into a hallway and praying. Should we have safe rooms? Should we have what design changes, especially for those schools that are in targeted areas of we know are going to be tornado high points?
Yes. Well, Illinois gets on average 54 tornadoes every year, and there's been more school-related tornado deaths in Illinois than any other state in the union. There's been many changes. The 2015 International Building Codes now require all new school buildings to have FEMA-approved designated tornado shelter areas. But most of our schools aren't being built. They're in existence already, and putting kids in hallways generally is not the right thing to do. And we learned through Joplin, because they had cameras for the first time, that hallways, if exterior doors give way, become wind tunnels. And so restrooms, locker rooms, basements, interior rooms that don't have exterior windows, which are rare, those would be the places. And if we'd have none of those places, and we're just a small building with one hallway down the middle, we can replace those exterior doors, all of the hardware, with wind-resistant door hardware. Probably not number one choice, but we can do that as well.
And when you, I don't know how much of your business is dealing with schools. I mean, here you're talking with school board members and administrators. When you deal with schools, what is the greater threat? Is it weather, or is it more along the line of a shooting kind of a thing?
It's absolutely weather. There's not even close. And the term active shooter is now moving anyway into the term active assailant, which could take into account any number of violence incidents, not just guns. But those are still very, very rare. It's just that it's so heartbreaking to see it happen. Right. We all get concerned, but severe weather by far is the greater concern, not even close.
And these days, with satellite technology, we can see bad weather. We know it's projected. Our schools, this may be an unfair question, but I'll ask you, you can answer it how you wish. Are school administrators, generally speaking, not taking the weather threat seriously enough?
That is a great question. I will tell you this.
I mean, should we be saying, hey, if they've issued a high probability of some tornadic activity, should we cancel schools early as we would with a threatened snowstorm, which we will do, but not with the tornado? On the other hand, how many times can you empty the school out, which is so disruptive? The parents are at work. You know, I mean, you see the problems here.
There's a tension. Well, let me say this. With the technology that we have to track storms, there is no excuse to be ignorant anymore. And there are requirements to make sure we have evacuation maps, you know, shelter-in-place areas. Insurance companies for schools are working on this all the time. And so what I find is the failing is that we put plans in place, but we did it because we were compliance-oriented, not because we were proactive. And that, what should have been a living document, began to collect dust. And we're not where we should be today with the information changes, the evolution of procedures that have taken place.
No one wants to have anyone lost, obviously. And sometimes, though, when we run the numbers, in any number of instances, while you might be expending an extra, I'll make up numbers, $50,000 or even $100,000 to have a safe room, let's say, relative to the loss of life and that $100,000 spread out over a time period that could be 30 years, you're talking about maybe an expenditure of $3,000 for a, school that the budget is going to be measured in the millions or tens of millions of dollars. Do you find it sometimes, like a lot of us, we get cheap, when we shouldn't, that maybe administrators or board members don't run the numbers and don't see how actually this really isn't all that expensive, especially right at this time when we have 3% or 4% where we can borrow at such cheap prices?
Yeah, the difficulty here is the topic of the day, and I don't envy administrators. They have a whole lot of things to answer for in their responsibilities. They've got curriculums and standards and personnel, all of these different things. And so what happens generally with security, which we call loss prevention, we want to prevent losses to people and places. The first law of loss prevention says this: effective loss prevention, which is what we all want, is always preceded by extensive losses. Meaning our neighbor doesn't get a burglar alarm system until after their house was burglarized, and they go, afterwards they say, wow, if I would have just spent a few dollars, I would have saved all. So the mindset.
They never put the stop sign up until the family of 5 is killed at the intersection, even though they knew it was a threat before.
That's the first law of loss prevention, and we have to do whatever we can to break it. And we can begin with low cost and no cost. Remember, I just want the arrow pointing in the right direction. So
don't make the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Exactly right. Exactly.
So what would you say then to these school board members who are going to watch this interview? They're going to hear what you're saying. What advice would you give them generically?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple keys. One of them is collaboration. What can we do to have a safety planning team that's actually functional and representative, filled with stakeholders, including students? What can we do to have a collaborative effort? Remember, the magic formula is always collaboration plus consensus. Let's talk about what we can do, and then let's come to agreement to do something. Collaboration will be the first key, and the second key is awareness. I think a staff that lives in Mayberry tends to think, well, nothing's ever happened and nothing will happen, and I don't want it to change, and I don't want my convenience threatened. I think awareness doesn't scare us into compliance, but awareness says, wait a minute, we're not living in a day where there's no seatbelts in cars. We're not living in a day where Our Lady of the Angels Catholic school can burn to the ground, 100 people die because we don't have any fire prevention measures. We have changed over the years, and it's time to continue to change so that we can prevent these types of incidences. As
people hear this, and if they want to know more, they can buy the book.
They can, yes.
I haven't had the chance to read the book, but are there more topics in here than what we've discussed?
Well, and thank you for asking that. The book is comprehensive, and I don't want to talk about it a lot, but I want to say we deal with everything from physical security and the cameras and to bullying prevention, because that's an aspect of security, social media.
Yeah, I mean,
risks.
You don't want your kid going, and we've had, sadly, experiences where kids commit suicide because they were so bullied, and the parents didn't know.
It's all part of the model, all the way to emergency preparedness. All of those things are important, but we finished the book with resources, and I just want to say this, whether you read my book or not, there are any number, especially of online and statewide resources that are available. One of the things, for example, I love to talk about is the Student Security Survey. And you can have a couple students complete a survey that is held right on the State Board of Education website and tells us what parts of the building are least safe and why, where bullying is most likely to occur. The answers that we have all wanted and that we can then bring resources to bear on are there for us if we will take hold of the tools and resources at our disposal.
Before we close out, and I could talk much longer, but sometimes we scare ourselves. You know, we see the Sandy Hook shooting and it's horrific, and all of a sudden, or 9/11, and we're seeing terrorists behind every bush. Yeah. As you look at the incidents nationally, is school safety, not just in Illinois, but nationally, are we getting better? Are the level of incidences going down? Or is it expanding merely because we're expanding the definition of what constitutes a threat?
Yes, I'm going to answer that in a couple ways. First of all, to say that schools are getting safer all the time, and sometimes because of incidents, we've said, whoops, we should probably do something too. So schools are getting safer, there's no doubt about that. Risks are growing. When you and I went to school, there were no social media risks.
Yeah.
And so risks are, and there will be other risks presenting themselves. And the third thing I would say is this. I would say that, whatever we can do and whatever we can do now to take action is going to pay off in the long run. There's another law that talks about that. But I call it the Giuliani principle because he said that Y2K and their preparations for that paid off at 9/11. They were able to mitigate more efficiently because of preparations they took for Y2K. And what I want to say is whatever preparations schools take today, and some are better than others, it's going to pay off for us in the long run. We have to be prepared. That's just part of good citizenship.
And obviously if parents, it's a given when you send your kid off to school, you expect them to come home safe and sound.
Yes.
Paul, Timm, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you.
Okay.